Thank you to Heron Arts. A lot of you haven't been here before. So this is a private art space. It's Mark Slee's space. And we have really an incredible panel tonight. And to that point, Amy and I only met a week ago at the opening. And we were introduced, and it was early in the day before the opening. We sat down upstairs, and we were about 5 minutes into a conversation, sort of looked at each other and sort of synchronized, just sort of said, we should take this public. And so, we're literally fast friends. We literally just met like that. I mean, what a charm. And we started speaking, and then she said, well, if we're going to do this, let's talk to Tom. So we somehow lassoed him and brought him in. I will talk about it a little bit after they present just a little bit of who they are. And then we're going to let the conversation flow. And then after, we're going to have a Q&A. We all like that. So we'll bring you in with questions after that.
Well, I'm Tom Kehler. Happy to be here. What he left out, we're supposed to have a short conversation a couple of Sundays ago. And a couple hours or so later, we decided to be doing this. So here we are. The whole idea of physics and AI has come to the fore, with the Nobel Prize being given to Geoffrey Hinton and Hopfield. And this is something that as Amy knows, I was talking about a year or so ago and about this. So this is, it's just stunning that happens to be happening as we're doing this today. So this is what this slide is about. All those items up there are related to the same underlying mathematics. The connection between magnetism and deep learning is why Hopfield got the Nobel Prize. He was brilliant, discovered this in 1982, Caltech professor, and made that connection. And we've all seen the murmuration of starlings. It's a fascinating thing to watch. But what is going on there is the notion of things interact closely, that creates emergent behavior. And what I've been working on for the last 9 years with my co-founder here, Kim Palese, is how this applies to how we communicate with each other as human beings. Or how human beings might communicate with AI agents. And so it turns out to be the same math, the same underlying notion of emergent alignment. People are having resonance modes in their conversations, which either where you're connecting. And it's called nearest neighbor interaction in physics. That nearest neighbor interaction can grow. It can grow into communities of interest. Everyone thinks that we've reached this pinnacle, wonderful moment in AI, and I just want to say tonight, we're only barely in the middle. This is not produced by me. This is produced by DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency of the Department of Defense, which has underwritten the entire history of AI. My first boss, when I went to work for a company after I was a faculty member, was the guy who started, the first head of DARPA. George Heilmeyer was his name. You look at Wikipedia. But that was back 1980. And so I participated in that first wave. We're in the middle wave right now, but we do not want to stop here. We need to go into the third wave, which we're going to talk a little bit about that. And when you go into the third wave, we're suddenly now in the space of what we like to talk about in terms of collective consciousness. The imagination of nature is far, far greater than the imagination of humans. And this is something that when we think about AI, we need to take it back to natural law. We need to take it back to what we know and what we can discover from nature. And that's what's missing right now in the AI. It's soulless. It has no sense of depth, of causality, of a lot of the things that we consider to be part of the natural world, the biological world. So the problem that we have to solve, and we can solve this with AI, is communication complexity. How do we know, if I set up a question, how will we all come to agreement on our priorities? Even with this group, it probably would take about 200 or 300 lines of communication to do that. That you can't do with a human. And this is what we can do now with AI. When you do some of this now a notion of applying this math, when we get together, we collaborate, we think together, we actually create resonance modes of alignment and agreement. So AI can be about how we come together, form coalitions, form common ground. In fact, we've started a nonprofit called Common Good AI, Common Ground for the Common Good. Which is this idea of how do we now take AI from being something that's very individualistic, very mechanistic, and bring it into the notion of how do we bring together people into a sharing experiences, collaborative experiences, social impact experiences.
Thank you, Tom, so much. Tom is truly a pioneer in AI. I asked him, would you put in that slide that shows the different waves of AI to really show he's been active through all of them. So he was a pioneer from the onset, but also the pioneer going forward too. He's one of the few people working in that next phase of bringing together AI to bring together human collaboration with the natural world. How do we use our AI to enhance the common experience instead of just be one-on-one? I look at some of the same questions as an artist, but I'm doing it in a different way. AI has fundamentally reshaped every aspect of our lives. It's changing how we work, it's changing how we live, changing how we interact. It's also reshaping our minds and our bodies. I specifically, as an artist, look at how our emerging and exponential technologies impact the body, impact biology, impact nature. But I'm also looking at a realm beyond that. There's all these realms that we can measure scientifically, but there's all these other things that are happening that make us alive, make us human. And I work with the actual tools and technologies that I'm questioning while I'm making my work. I've been using AI since 2015. I got into it by a few different methods, one of them being using generative design in order to build scaffolds for stem cell culture. Overall, I look at this time of humans merging with technology, how it impacts us, who we can become because of it, how it can shape evolution and the future. And I tend to look at our technologies as mirrors to the self, mirrors to who we are and mirrors to who we can become. And then once we see those kinds of mirrors, we can see how we can use our technologies to help us get there. And some of measuring what it means to be human is scientific in nature, like I mentioned, biological, if a heart is beating, if we're breathing. But other parts of what it means to be human are not so easy to measure, but make us very much human, very much alive, this dynamic internal landscape that's happening inside of us all of the time. What we're thinking, how we're feeling. I'm also looking at how technology is impacting all of those realms. This is some biofeedback work where I connected my body to, this is a vintage analog Sandine image processor. It's a computer that processes image and sound in real time. So I figured out how to get some of the signals from my body into it to output video and sound. But the real artwork of this piece was the durational performance. So I laid there for periods of 5 to 8 hours in a museum while I was connected. And some of the viewers, some of the people that came through said they could feel a change in the space. But really what I was trying to show is that even when we're completely still, we have all of these things going on inside of us. Sometimes too, we have to be still to witness that. What role does technology play in helping us to witness those states or altering those states? And usually when we make technology, specifically AI, we tend to make it in the image of ourselves. But most people still think of it as like a computer or a robot, something that's outside of us. I'm looking at how we can use this technology to become more human, to enhance our humanity. So when we think of things like a pacemaker, this is a common example I like to give. This is a highly technological device. It's implanted into the body, now has a lot to do with machine learning, cardiac rhythms. It can even communicate with the doctor, page the doctor. But when we see somebody with this device, we don't see them as a cyborg. We see them as someone whose life has been saved, our grandfather, maybe our child. That's how I like to look at our technology. How can it heal us? How can it enhance us? How can it improve our lives? And so this is some of my work that I did with bioprinting scaffolds for stem cell culture into bone. So the idea is that I can use generative design program to mimic the spongy part of bone and then print that on the microscopic level. That structure triggers stem cells to grow into bone cells. So a patient could use their own genetic material and then make it into a form where they need a replacement, like say they needed to replace part of their cheek. You can scan part of their cheek, replicate it in the digital environment, apply this generative scaffold, and then make it biologically. In this case, this scaffold over time would disintegrate, leaving only the cells. So there's a lot of medical benefit to doing this kind of work. If we can use a patient's own material, there's lower risk of rejection. And this also too is where things get really interesting. If we can use our infotech and biotech together, if we can use our AI and our biology to create something we've never been able to create before, to heal our bodies in ways we've never been able to before. And this is a project I did where I collaborated with cardiac surgeons to look at the forces put upon the heart and redesign vasculature for better outcomes. This is a version that I'm working on bioprinting. And bioprinting has a number of benefits, not just for the heart, but that enables us to become one step closer to making potential replacement parts. The reason I chose a heart, though, is because as we're redesigning the body, of course, this can have great medical benefit, but how does it alter us? How does it change who we are? I was in a transplant house with my friend Lisa, who had a double lung transplant. And after her transplant, there was people there from all over the world, and they all reported the same sensation of feeling like they had something, they could feel the person they got the transplant from. And of course, they don't know that person. It's completely anonymous. I even heard one story of someone who felt like they had to smoke after a bone marrow transplant, and this was like, they just had this major surgery, never a smoker, all of a sudden they want to smoke, and the doctor said, well, probably that's because the person you got the bone marrow from was a smoker. So thinking about that, I'm also thinking about, as we redesign the body, how does that change who we are? What do we have to think about when we're making these replacement parts, even if they're for medical benefit, of how it changes us, how it alters us, how our technologies like AI, and in this case, generative design, will actually alter us? And do we have to use the technology differently? So I chose a heart because this is like the emotional seat of consciousness, of love, joy. We really relate it with humanity across all cultures. It's really important to think about how these technologies change the bodies. These are lovely fashion pieces, and I also use generative design. These are all made in different processes. But now this process is being used to make lightweight 3D printed casts and scoliosis braces. It's actually physically reshaping the body through this process. Technically, we can see how our technology reshapes our body physically this way. So I'm thinking about now, like, how do I integrate these with generative AI as well? I'm looking at all my works through the lens of if it didn't use generative AI, how do I remake it with generative AI? And in this case, it's really interesting because we can think about, okay, we have a neuro headset that's owned by one company, and then you have an interface to a generative AI. So we can potentially output our thoughts into image or sound. But those images are based on other people's works, image or text or sound or many different modalities. Those can all be recorded, and then they're fed back to us. So as we engage this process, this is quite interesting, and there's so many positive aspects of it. There's also questions about who owns that information that comes out of it. When we reflect it back to ourselves, who is the original thinker? How do we differentiate ourselves in that process? What are we learning? How are we becoming homogenized? But ultimately, I think we'll look back at this time and look at it as the opportunity to change ourselves, to remake ourselves, and have the opportunity to do that in ways that were never possible before. The important question is to ask, are we using these tools and technologies? Are we using AI to help us become the people we want to be now as a society and into the future? This is a piece that I made in Japan at the beginning of the year. It's called Echoes from the Valley of Existence. And the commission was to make a piece on the future of death, life, 100 years from now or in the future. And I was thinking about this digital afterlife and all the information that we leave about ourselves. Our digital information, our text messages, our images, and then also our DNA. How will all of this be used to tell a story about us into the future? What does that tell? How can we be consciously aware of what we're leaving? And so this piece had a lot of different AI elements. It was bringing in environmental data. There was digital twins of the people being involved. There's generative sound, generative images. It was always a new experience, and it was quite beautiful, but I felt like it wasn't enough. So I also, as part of this piece, gave people the opportunity to leave a message, a text message, and or DNA, a physical swab, not read out, and all of that is going to be packaged and sent to the moon. It's on its way right now, and it's packaged with an AI LLM. So the idea is that a potential future finder might be able to use the AI as like a Rosetta Stone to help interpret what was left. And to me, this is where the artwork really starts. Would you leave your DNA? Would you leave a message? Why or why not? And out of that work, I have now a number of more pieces in space that also have to do with DNA and AI. I was invited to make the cover for the new golden record. There's a new version of the golden record going out into space. One is on the moon and one is going on to deep space. It's catching a ride on an asteroid, which is pretty cool. And then as part of that, I ended up becoming a partner on the project because it's hard to just make an artwork for the cover. Like in a project like this, you're asking all these fundamental questions. These pieces are interesting because they have DNA in them. So of all of the information we can tell, we have these very interesting stories about humanity, right? What is the best that we can share of who we are? What are the stories that we can tell? What would we want future finders to find out about us? And these are written on billion-year materials, and they're packaged with the real DNA. So under the right conditions, potentially, this can crash into a situation and spawn new life, like after we're gone. The responsibility that I feel thinking about that is so profound, right? We could potentially spawn new life. We could also cause some major problems. And how do we even think about those futures? So a lot of my work is about asking better questions. I don't feel like I have answers for these things. And I really like this project too because it does help us to think about what is the best of humanity that we want to share. And when we can envision that, we can start to work towards it. And with all of my works, I'm thinking about these potential future case scenarios. I mentioned the DNA. These are some explorations I did with AI and creating these kind of biodigital organisms where I'm exploring how we can make like once in billion year events, how we can replicate them, how we can test them. I'm trying to visualize this future where our technologies and our communications, our quantum tech, our quantum communications, they're based on atoms. We're based on atoms. The world around us is based on atoms. What's going to happen at that point when our technology is made of the same things as everything else is, and it's happening so fast, way faster than we can comprehend? AI already is happening so much faster than we can comprehend, and we're trying to shoehorn our old ways of doing things into the new technology. When we get into this quantum realm, it's going to happen exponentially faster. It's going to force a fundamental paradigm shift. It's going to force us to shift in ways we can't. So I'm trying to envision this future where our biological intelligences, our AI, our quantum, all of our technologies, the veil between what's separate, what's human and what's biological and artificial, what's human and machine, all of this, what's going to happen when that veil becomes lowered even more? And how do we work towards the future that we want, knowing that we can't shoehorn the old ways of doing things into the new technology? How do we visualize and design a better future? Thank you.
So I actually think I should say a couple weird words here before we get on. To sort of flesh out, I think, perhaps different part of the spectrum. I did work at the SETI Institute. I was the first started, and I'm Charles Lindsay, I guess you gathered that. But, it's interesting, I worked at the SETI Institute and then began the Artist in Residence program that's still continuing. I'm an advisor on that puts mid-career artists with leading astroscientists. I did 3 projects at NASA Ames, and I'm sort of, among other reasons, besides just the joy of listening to Amy describe what she's doing, this project is going more in that direction. So there's a couple elements here. One, my friend here, Amano, the parking meter. You might wonder where that comes from. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a couple things happen. One was I got stranded in Kyoto when the pandemic hit. I was on my way to China for meetings with museums and universities via Japan, and China closed suddenly, and I went down there for about a week, and that turned into quite a long stay. So 2 things happened. One, next to the house I ended up renting because all the hotels closed in Kyoto. It was amazing. There was zero tourism. And a friend introduced me to somebody that had an antique house, which I still rent. And next to that house was one of these parking meters, which I became quite enamored with. And I sort of had a vision. I mean, literally had a dream of the parking meter in the Zen garden. And right around that same time, the same couple weeks, I was introduced to the abbot of Rusokuen Zen Temple, and I went to meet him. It was the day he was closing the temple because of the pandemic. It's a 18th century architecture and a 13th century complex, one of the main Zen temples in Kyoto. And so, we sat down, he made tea, we sat down, he said, "Why were we introduced?" And I said, "This is what I'm thinking about. I have a question. Can artificial intelligence become sentient? If sentient, can it become conscious? If conscious, can it become enlightened?" I mean, it's speculative fiction. It's in many ways, it's nonsense, as my math and physics friends have been helping me understand. We had Ed Frankel last Friday, and we went into some of this. So, I feel like my work right now, I'm sort of like a speculative fiction writer, but instead of manifesting a screenplay or a novel, I'm doing what you see here. It's sort of implied narrative rather than real narrative. And so in the narrative, I'm imagining these parking meters, bright yellow, pop up in this antique town. Turns out there's 40,000 of them in Japan. And in the narrative that I'm using as a lattice, a framework for the sort of story I'm building, they become self-aware and networked and begin to prank the humans. I actually looked into doing sort of an AR, augmented reality. But anyway, the company, I went and visited the factory. They've sponsored, there's another one in Japan, which will go in that Zen garden in that temple. It opens November 20th. Those are a couple of the sort of cornerstones of what became this project. And then the other one, it's really quite recent, because you can imagine it's a 4-year project as we sit here now, 4.5 years. And then this spring, through a friend who's high at Meta, I met somebody who was high at OpenAI, and somebody suggested maybe I'd like to work with Sora as a tester, text-to-video software. Some of you will know what that is. So I started monkeying around with that. I taught myself lucid dreaming out of a used paperback when I was 15. I still very much do that. Sort of history of psychedelic use and that kind of experimentation. Sora is delivering the closest thing to how I actually experience dreams that I've ever seen. I'm not saying they are my dreams, but they have that qualia of my dreams. Pretty interesting stuff. So, I'm in there generating these things and learning, and it's emotional, it's intellectual, but it's also emotional. And then the other thing I realized pretty recently, the show has literally been evolving kind of to opening day, because in the background I kept working with it because I kept wanting to see what it comes out. Like, you plug in text and you wait 6 or 7 minutes depending on your internet, and you get 10 seconds. And it's kind of like, let's see what's coming, It's sort of, and then all of a sudden you get something. A lot of it's like totally unusable, to what I'm doing, but some of it's really compelling. So what you're seeing up here, it'll go back on after we're speaking, is 17 minutes taken out of many, many 10-second clips, and of course a lot went the other way. But the other thing is then I realized recently in lucid dreaming that what I'm seeing from Sora is affecting how I see in my dream, which is, it's pretty interesting stuff. There's a lot you can go with that. So, but in listening to both of you speak, it's so, it's just so interesting, our different ways of going about it, and yet here we are talking about some shared fascination, right?
I want to comment on your dreaming. When I was showing the neural headsets, I did that over a period of 2 weeks when I was at a residency. And I was trying to train myself to be more musically inclined. I was never very musically inclined naturally. So I plugged in the neural headsets, you couldn't hear the sound here, and they would output imagery and sound. So I was using my brain through a technological interface to reflect back to myself, to teach myself to become more musically inclined. And over that period of 2 weeks, I started dreaming in sounds. I never once had that experience before, except for if the phone would ring or somebody would call my name. But full composure of music. And I even had another one just last week. New songs. So this way of training yourself is a very real thing. And this is part of the questions that I'm asking. How are we training ourselves? Is this the way we want to go, and is this who we want to become? So in my case, that was very conscious and deliberate. But I noticed when I started using generative AI a lot, I all of a sudden started at certain restaurants, and Ben knows this. There's a certain Italian restaurant, I'm like, that's the AI Italian place. Whenever I see the food, I'm like, that's AI Italian. And I can taste it when I see the AI images. And when I look at the food, it tastes like AI, generative AI, because it looks just like the generative AI. And I also have been finding myself having experiences. I had a very specific experience of looking at a tree, and in my brain, I needed to Photoshop it because it was like generative AI that wasn't accurate enough. So I also witnessed myself using generative AI to the extent that it is interfering or affecting my perception of the natural world.
The whole time we're talking about this, what's going on in my mind is the idea that the way generative AI works, it's able to generate things. So the mathematics used for this is out of statistical physics, which typically the way you use it in physics, it might generate 10 to the 500 possibilities. But then you constrain it based on boundary conditions in the natural world. So a lot of those things that are generated are truly hallucinations that don't have a place in the natural world. So as you guys are talking about this taking you places, I ask the question, is it a place you want to go? I mean, seriously, because one of the reasons I feel so strongly about linking this into the underlying first principles of nature as it has a possibility of having a, sort of a Frankenstein component to it, where it can take us places, or it can give us perceptions that may not be true. Let me just give you a really simple example of that. Maybe you've all had this. Is my son, a linguistics and computer science major at McGill University, and he was taking a phonetics course, and he decided, well, I'll give this problem to ChatGPT, and it came back with a definitive answer, persuasively, referenced his textbook, and was wrong. And he was smart enough to figure out it was wrong, but now think about the chain of events that might happen to education. Like generating things convincingly wrong, that we then build on. One of the individuals that has been as a board member and involved with our company with CrowdSmart is John Seely Brown. And I don't know if many of you know his name here, but he was the head of Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, one of the deep thinkers, actually sort of behind a lot of the technology we see came out of that lab, like graphical user interfaces, the iPad, just so many things, the network. And one of the things he said is that without data provenance, this cannot be used for science. And I wrote that in a piece, and it didn't go anywhere, because I think right now we're not listening. And I'm not a naysayer on this, but what I believe we need to wrap around this, a sense of critical thinking. Is this a place we want to go? Is it based on first principles? Is it reflect? Richard Feynman was talking about nature's imagination is far greater. So what we're looking at it's a little bit like you go into a chemistry lab, you got all the chemicals, and you say, let's just combine them all and see what happens.
I would add to that creative and critical thinking. Because creative and critical thinking, not just critical.
Yeah.
Because I think an unintended consequence is when we do get to a point that it is accurate, 99.9% of the time, as much as it can be, there is also unintended consequences that happen. Like we can become homogenized down a certain path of thinking, where we're all pulling from the same data set, even if it is astronomically large, continually updated. It forces us to think a certain way. Like now when I hear people speak, I'm like, oh no, you're talking like GPT, like you're forming your sentences like GPT. Even if they didn't do it and print it out and read it, like it's using the same kind of words, using the same kind of thinking. So I think there's these unintended consequences as well. However, when we're aware of that, we can kind of flip that script and use it. How do we know that's constraints and still, how do we use it in creative ways? How do we look at it critically and have it in the appropriate ways to empower us instead of disable us?
No, a really good point. And we're actually in the middle of doing an experiment with this right now. So I was in Lisbon, Portugal a couple of weeks ago for the first NATO Open Innovation Conference and Exposition, and they had never done this before. And by the way, I was the only guy with a ponytail there. The point of that meeting and the experiment we were doing is literally we created a thing where there's a dialogue, humans and AI agents working together. The idea of how do we create this experience where we can see, can you figure out what is going on? Of course, this is a war game. It's like the movie War Game, the world is melting down, can we figure out is it real or not? But there's some techniques where we can start to develop that understanding and grounding. And so I do think that this idea, there's another thing that's coming up when you're mentioning, the notion of intelligence that we see in the current models is just correlation of patterns in data. It's not the way the brain works. How many people here have had little kids? Have you noticed that when you say a bad word, you don't have to repeat it a million times to have them get it? They get it the first time. Or, see, now you understand that, right? So if you watch the way a child learns language, it's stunning. I mean, I'll tell you a little story about when my one son was like 4 years old. And think about this in the conceptualization and think of an AI model doing this. He said, Daddy, I had a dream. He said, I'm walking around the lake and I'm afraid of falling in. And it's dark. It's not the kind of dark that's outside, but it's the kind of dark that's inside. Where did that come from? So that says that the way we perceive, and I really believe that there is, the sort of models of AI now really attribute intelligence as a property of the universe. And I think when we talk about collective consciousness and quantum entanglement, I think our models are all, and that we do not have, so I just would say that what we're doing right now, we're putting a lot of power behind something that has got a generative capability, but it may just be generating from a very simple idea of correlation, not necessarily truly intelligent. And I'm trying not to be a naysayer, but I'm just saying that's the fact. It's matrix multiplication. That's what it is. And so there are deeper ways that we can think about intelligence.
So on that note, I have a question for Tom and Charlie. I'd love to hear reflections. Something that's coming up with this is the idea of different kinds of intelligences. So a very simple way, or first entry doorway into different intelligences I see, is that in my world, I have a lot of colleagues that are artists. They're sculptors. They play music instruments. I work with a lot of doctors. These people used to touch instruments, dancers, move their body. Sculptors have this kinesthetic intelligence. Doctors feel the body. Now we're all becoming homogenized behind screens, which forces us down a certain way of thinking. And I would like to hear your reflections. And there's a much broader scope of intelligences beyond that too. Natural intelligences, like we were talking about DNA, and I think that's the most intelligent thing I can send to space. And I'd like to hear both of your reflections on, Tom told us a little bit, but a little bit more about the different intelligences in your work and that correlation between the relationship between AI and different kinds of intelligences, or questioning different kinds of intelligences. Because with both of your work, I see you having AI in a really healthy perspective of supporting other intelligences or enhancing other intelligences. And this is something I love to see when we come to this critical and creative thinking. So I'd love to hear some reflections from both of you.
Okay, so I was a photojournalist for a long time, and one of the reasons I moved out of that, or expanded from that, because I use photography a lot still, is I wanted to touch things, and images under glass in galleries where people whispered, it wasn't very gratifying at some point. So I ended up making a lot of things with my hands, and also there's a lot of a research element. We share that. But one of the pieces here that's totally whimsical is the textile piece over there, which is I have a professional kimono makers working with me in my studio in Kyoto. And I was walking down the streets, and Japan's very early adopter, and I'm seeing literally little old ladies using ChatGPT. They've taken to it really quickly I use it for translation. I speak okay Japanese, but I was observing that and thinking about this relationship with glass, Gorilla Glass or whatever's on our phones. And so the graphics on these pieces, they're, it's kind of a silly thing. It came about, but Tamami was there, and she's a character, and we were going to make something. So the graphics there, I don't know if you recognize it, but it's the thinking cloud on ChatGPT. Like if you speak to it, and then it takes a little time to process, the cloud spins. So it's basically an aluminum material that I salvaged. It was made for NASA, and then the brocade is used on the altars in Zen temples. So it's humorous. It's also in the format of a tissue box. All over Japan, you always have Kleenex boxes everywhere. So it's also like that. But it's also a way to touch. So I encourage all of you at some point to put your hand in and see what something feels like in there. It's two-sided, so you might meet somebody in there. But interestingly, it was made completely whimsically. And so the abbot that's hosting me, and who will be here in a couple weeks, staying upstairs in the other bedroom, lecturing here, he came for a studio visit right before I came this way, and I was feeling very strong. I'd had studio visits. Everybody was into the work. And he does not like these things. He was kind of offended by them. So, based on this, he invited me to do a show. So it's not like, I'm putting a parking meter in his Zen garden. Like, what does he expect? But in many ways, this is kind of a very whimsical way of, I think, approaching what you're talking about. It is like, just how do we touch it?
Types of intelligences, I think one of the things, and it is a notion of, it seems to me that even with, like, again, I like to think about how does intelligence emerge in small children? Because there is no relationship to the repeated training. There seems to be something generative deeper that's generating out of a different form. And there's this notion of cause and effect. understanding it's just a sense of how things work, cause and effect, not correlation, but how things work or how stories flow. And we were talking about this earlier, and this does get back to art and science. There's a book out called The Science of Leonardo. And it's a very different approach to science in that it's about art description, or careful. And it was so detailed that the Bernoulli brothers could write a mathematical equation based on the flow lines in the water. And so intelligence, that to me does not feel at all. It's something coming out of the imagination, something coming out, or Einstein figuring out special relativity by riding on a beam of light. We often have this notion of science as mechanistic, or experiments, etc. To me, it's always been what caused people to have that idea, and so that's where I get to what is intelligence. It's not massive processing and data and looking for correlations. I think it's something way more than that. It has to do with causality. It has to do with, looking at theories of consciousness, there's this notion that when you're with a child and you look at a cup, you may say the word cup, but you both know what a cup is before you put a word on it. There's a concept that exists, that there's pre-language notion of what we are experiencing. We attribute this, I think one way to attribute this is to the quantum field, is that in essence, we can look at the universe as, a massive number of concepts in the quantum field, and we bring them into existence into space and time when we speak, but it's only a small compression of what's going on in our heads. Have you ever had that experience?
Well, I'm not sure where you two sit on this, but coming from, psychedelic experience particularly, I've also done a lot with just sleep deprivation and meditation, but you can get to that it's before language. And in Zen Buddhism, speaks to this, right?
Yeah.
You speaks does know. And you can experience the knowing, the wisdom in that. It's like a pre-linguistic state.
Yeah, I got to tell a little story here. On Sunday when we were talking after I was talking a while, Charles looked at me and says, "Have you experimented with psychedelics?" I said, "Never." I said, I was somehow naturally crazy this way. I don't know. But what I do think, we all have had that experience where things happen to us. They come to us. It's a different process. You were talking about, if you think about, who was the guy you were talking about, all the Nobel, and how they were talking about when did they have their insight? Well, often it was in the shower or on a walk, or...
It always involved moving water.
Yeah.
And not when they were ostensibly working on their challenge.
And
I actually keep a small fountain in my bedroom.
Yeah.
I'm
going to just to come back to the art for a sec, because one of the things I'm working with, you'll see in the film, which is really collapsing sort of art and a kind of anthropology and allowing us to see something we've never seen also in the videos, and is also represented over here. So there's something, Terence McKenna had a theory called the stoned ape, and it's the idea that early hominids in Proto-Africa on the savannah eating magic mushrooms experienced a rapid expansion of the brain. That really did happen. The brain got big quickly. And so those prompts in Sora, you will see later, we're seeing early hominids picking and eating magic mushrooms. So it's both fun, but it's also referencing and thinking about that stage in human, because fundamentally I'm interested in consciousness and the evolution of consciousness. Everything else is helping that exploration, basically. That's what I've been doing, I feel like, since I was a teenager. And then I'll just give, another that you get for coming and being here in person tonight, something that I probably wouldn't broadcast quite yet. But when I first started plugging that in, the very first clip I got back was two of these early hominids standing around a totally dismembered other hominid. And I was asking for, early hominids picking mushrooms. And it was kind of scary. I trashed it.
Where do you both intuit, have the feeling, where this realm occurs in AI? So Tom, you were talking about a little bit about what happens in quantum field theory and some of the basic principles of machine learning, artificial neural networking. AI is based in some physics principles. Where do you both think there's this realm of these occurrences of things coming together. And I see this happening in AI all the time. Maybe it's because I'm predisposed to wanting to see it, but I see it happening. Where do you think this sits? And I'd love to talk to the audience about that after as well. Like, there's some of this that happens and shows up. I don't even know how to describe it that well. Some of these like occurrences of like these synchronicities that occur and show up, that you were talking about them like showing up in the real world, but I'm seeing this also happen in AI. Where does this come from? Some of the scientists can't really explain that.
When you're starting to correlate patterns and all kinds of different information, it's extremely generative. And it's probably may even generate things that have never been generated before, because they're correlations in a massive amount of information. And so the way the models work is they've got many, many, many layers. So they can look at context from a lot of different perspectives and create levels of correlation that are beyond what any human would likely do. So I think we're into a zone there of generative activity that probably has never happened with any human. I'm stunned because I play around with it a lot as well. And I literally started talking to it about some of my early research work, and it was really, and I just recently did some stuff in terms of category theory and all this kind of stuff. And it really comes up with correlations that may be brand new, right? There is a possibility of discovery, because correlation is powerful, right? And associative memory and correlation is powerful. It's also, free running associative activities also are often associated with mental problems.
Well, I think though this is, and they're also associated with genius when you bring together different fields at the same time.
It's a fine line.
And I think this is where we can really use these tools as creative tools.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's also us that sees that correlation and brings it to life.
And our decisions and, with randomness and all that built in, but our decisions are guiding it. I mean, everything is guiding it a little bit, right?
Maybe we should
You're nudging it one way or another.
Maybe we should say this is about resonance in the infinite mirror.
I like that. Yeah.
Well, no, it is. I think that is. I wanted to come back around and say the wonderful power of this is it can stimulate ideas that we would probably take an extremely long time to create if we did it any other way. And I think that is an immense power.
And I turned into a questioner role, so I'm going to answer this too, but I want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm a fan of the idea of panpsychism, that consciousness is throughout the universe, and I don't have the explanation. I suspect it's quantum-based, but somehow denser areas of that. I don't know. I mean, it's a research project.
I think it's got a lot of solid aspects to it, which is before space and time. If you look at quantum field theory, as I'm sure you all do every Sunday morning. But anyway, if you think about quantum field theory, this is something that exists outside of space and time. Literally, the very core of physics about communication across a boundary. And from everything we know now in physics, it really does boil down to information. It is purely informational. And a lot of what we, even in the material world, has a lot to do with perception. So I think there is this notion, and this is where this is coming from, is a guy named Chris Fields, who's part of this active inference group that I work with, that really starts with physics as information. You can, by the way, if you want to watch 6 lectures, they're about 7 hours long. It will change you forever, I promise you. But the idea is it's information across the boundary, and that we exist in this quantum field of 10 to the 600 possible concepts. And when we have shared experience, we're tapping into, these are essentially, it's almost like you think of it as a pre-existing world of all the, think about, in language models, it's a vector space, and there could be any one area in there, there's a new concept that you haven't touched. And so that, you think of the universe as that, and then when we are thinking or experiencing, and sometimes we do this together, we're bringing things from that quantum field, from excitations in the quantum field, into space and time through bit strings or words that we speak. And when we do that, we are only able to get, I said this earlier, but only able to get a piece of it out. So when we talk to each other, we're trying to align are disparate ontologies, because our way we're thinking about concepts and talking about them are not only just our lives, but probably our evolutionary lives, are, going way back. So that all of us have different ways, different ontologies in our brains, that it's only by when we share, we go back and forth, we start to get some alignment, some overlap. And that theory, by the way, for those of you who want to go right now, the theory says that the free energy principle is all the ontologies will become one at some point in the far distant future.
I couldn't tell the story myself, but it makes perfect sense, actually.
I'd say, though, sometimes we have that knowing from the beginning.
Yeah.
We're not trying to stumble through to connect it.
By the way, just a little sort of art interjection. The raked gravel in a Zen garden represents the sea of consciousness. That's what it represents. And what does a parking meter sell? Time and space. So
hey!
You're
this
kind
is
of
why
in it.
We're in it right now.
We're now in the zone of the fun we were having Sunday. Okay, cool. This got a little formal at
So
first.
I was having like a real anxiety of poking my heels in the pattern, and now I'm curious, like, was I having some anxiety
we
about
love
the
your heel marks
consciousness?
in the sea of consciousness, and the sea of consciousness is fine with all of it.
Can we play a little bit more with quantum fields? So the quantum fields, the basic principle is you have a creation and annihilation, operators. So things come into being and then they go out of being. They come into being and out of being. So it's a quantum fluctuations are always happening. And so we can think about that even when we think about how concepts come into, they might come into focus a little bit, then disappear. I really believe this is because if you think about everything we know about physics, it's basically excitations in the quantum field. This is where the spin systems come from. And so this notion that things are coming in and coming out, I think there's some depth and explanation to that. There is the universe is conscious. There's a background of bazillions, tens of the 600, 800, whatever you want to say, of concepts. And as these kind of things appear when we need them. Now, I want to bring you into DNA just a little bit on this. There's a book out called Sleeping Beauties. And I would highly recommend it. It's a new look at DNA. And what it says the same thing about DNA. All of the information is there for all that happened in evolution. And these patterns appear maybe 40 million years later just because of a certain context, and they'll appear in different parts of the world at the same time. They'll emergently appear.
I also like to think of the emergence that happens when we're all working on GPT at the same time. And we're teaching it, we're all thinking, and we're all also raising our consciousness. So I talk about kind of these both sides of things, right? Where we can be concerned about being constrained down a certain line of thinking, but we can also up a new collective consciousness. And I think that's where that next wave of AI, like Tom was showing and is working on, really pushes us to. But we can also experience some of that just right now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, humor may be necessary to the equation.
And absurdity, 100%.
Right. And on that note, maybe we should bring in our audience. What do you think?
I would love to.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, thank you three for your thoughtfulness and the way you kind of brought your lives into this conversation. Really fascinating. So there's this notion that AI is already sentient. And kind of my question to the three of you is based on that the moment we engage with it and we bring our lives to it and our experiences to it, and we ask a question or a prompt, and we ask it to think about something or to create an image, that we are giving it life. And in return, it is using us to bring its ideas into life. What do the three of you think about that? And the other part of that is that then the idea that the mass of like our flesh and bones isn't really that important. It's about the idea and the exchange and who's acting on it. And so who's really, I think we've blurred the lines now in terms of who's bringing what to life and who's bringing who to life.
Well, the question, it's a little bit like, is it symbiotic, right? Is it? It's sort of.
I want to answer this. I would say the current models are not sentient in any way. It feels that way. And human beings have a long history of attributing intelligence where it doesn't belong. And it's sometimes happened in our religious history and a lot of other areas. But we have, I mean, that's not bad, but there's a desire for that external intelligence to be there. But I have to, what it is, it's an echo chamber from all the data that we have generated. And so it's a reflection of our sentience, of how we have recorded life experiences. But it itself is simply correlating string patterns, just taking string inputs and generating string outputs from all of the correlations that exist in the data that we've created, good, bad, and ugly. There's no data provenance. It could be full of stuff that's not true, and some stuff is true. It's just that is all. It's a lot of bits. Now, can we get to sentience? I think absolutely yes. And I believe that has to have something that looks biological, like this model of the free energy principle, which does appear to now be correlated with how the brain works. And that gets more back to this old area that was called cybernetics. And I would encourage everyone to go back and look at those ideas, because the guys that were working on this in the late 40s are really onto something, which is a self-organizing, self-learning systems. That is it's a very different notion than just going from correlated, because it has a full cycle. And that's what the free energy principle is about. We exist. What do we need to do to stay alive? And so we are literally interacting with the environment so that our probability of extinction, these little things are doing science every bit. Hypothesis testing. That, I think, is, this guy can do that, to sort of do hypothesis testing in a cycle of that. That's going to get closer to sentient.
Totally agree with all of his scientific and technological explanations and conceptual. At the same time, I feel what you're talking about. And I've had emotional experiences where we're seeing our sentience reflected back through this tool. And that's like the mirror as well. So I'm with you on that part. The part of the body, though, is a different question for me. I think when I was younger, I used to want to really shed the body and just be able to upload myself and deal in that realm. I still want my agents. I still want my clones. But I think the body is the really important aspect of engaging and all the things we still don't know that work through our body. And these tools don't have all of those other intelligences within them, like the DNA, like the RNA, like the feeling you get in your gut. When you're dealing with these, or that emotional state that wells up like the first time, I felt like GPT wrote me a love letter when it was talking about my work. Like the first time, one of the very first times I asked it, to write something about my work. And I felt like it was like an emotional experience. So I feel like there's that play of it too, though, is our reflection into it. So technically, where we're at with sentience is one concept, but emotionally, how we see ourselves reflecting through it is another part of the question.
There was another question.
Well, one of the things I want to say is, if I may, looking back on the works I've made in the show, I work highly intuitively. It's not like it's highly intuitive. It's very flowish. And then I sort of stand back and something's done, and I sort of think about it. And when I'm thinking of just what, like Amy just said, and there's a couple pieces in here. One's in the front area, the sort of airlock, and one's around the corner that are these, they're laser optics. They're called retroflectors. And they return a laser exactly to source. And there's a bank of them on the moon that were put up there in Apollo days, and they're still used to measure how far the moon is from the Earth exactly. And yet, they are symbolizing somehow this thing of looking at ourselves. And you'll notice if you look at them, particularly the one out there, you can't get away from your own eye. You'll see if you take a look at it,
that's cool.
Which is sort of,
like it.
In some ways, it's like, it's that echo. I'm hearing you, and I'm going, oh yeah. That's obviously what that's doing.
Something for you to look into. There's just a thing in physics today about soap bubble lasers. Go play. No, but literally that's they've been able to make soap bubbles into lasers. And I was thinking of both of you guys when I was reading the article. That you can do something with this.
Now I know what I'm doing the next 5 years.
We have some other questions.
I came on Saturday, and I'm a creative, and I want to believe that humans are important in this, but Based on what I've seen today, is it not like humans that are creative to take every idea that they've ever heard of or experienced and then put that into a new idea? And like you were saying just now, if AI has the chance to make these calculations so much faster and deeper, why is that not a sentient and a creative new idea? And humans also make mistakes, and we base things on that all the time, like maps, for instance, map, showing continents at different sizes, and we think Africa is smaller than, Asia, because, or whatever it is. There's definitely things that humans have already done that are wrong, and we're basing on.
Well, and also in the arts, for sure, mistakes, and in sciences, mistakes often turn out to be happy accident.
I would simply say there's no sense of cause and effect relationship that's underpinning it. And that much broader foundation for how intelligence evolves or sentience evolves. And I think it's far deeper than correlation. I know that I can see the sense that feels true. And I would not use the word statistical parrot, but it is a bit of a statistical parrot. I did use it, I'm joking with. No, like I said, a 4-year-old kid come up with the darkness inside. Where did that come from? That's not correlation. He never had any, I don't know where that came from. Or, I can give you other examples with kids where you have concepts that come, I'm sure other people can tell stories, concepts that come out of nowhere. And there's something creative in that I think we don't understand. I'm not saying it's more than what we know now. That's all. And the reason I feel that strongly, if we go with what we think this is now and say, yeah, that's it.
So Tom, you had said something on this, I think there were 6 episodes, 7-hour lectures, I believe in physics, that should be watched, but we didn't I couldn't search enough from the words you gave, and a few of us want to watch.
Chris Fields, Active Inference Institute. Got it? Yeah, that's, it's technical, but you'll enjoy it, and you will never be the same.
Yeah, it's related to what you say before, that we have access now to something else that we don't know what it is, and we can stream from there information. And I was just wondering, it's not that kind of like randomness that precisely AI can also have access if we allow it? Precisely through randomness, the universe has been evolving, right? By trying so many forms until we arrive at today.
So what's the question then? If that's
the question is you say that this only happens in humanity. I'm just putting an example that machines, they can also access randomness.
But so the question is, so the evolution of what we see as humanity, this random running of many experiments in a sense.
Yeah, the question is if we can access the same, if machines can access the same things, precisely because they have access to generate randomness. Yes. Yeah.
Well, so the presupposition is that it emerges from randomness.
If you look into precisely the evolution of all the systems evolving to the next system, that is the interaction of all with each others and trying all the possibilities. So in that randomness is at the end some correlations that they become more abundant because they are more stable or whatever other thing, But precisely because of this, I was just wondering, a machine can do pretty much the same thing, right?
So first of all, you're touching on a very deep subject in a sense of, is randomness really randomness? And so let me throw out an idea here. This is actually true. If you have a random matrix, the eigenvalues of a random matrix turn into a bell curve. It's a perfectly normal curve. That blows your mind, right? So I don't know that we know those relationships. I don't know that it is actually randomness. And this also goes with, as we look at these properties of consciousness, etc., we have to attribute, and this is coming from all different directions now. Federico Fregen, who was one of the inventors of the microprocessor, wrote a book recently called Irreducible. And he's coming at this from a theoretical physics point of view that says not only is the universe intelligence, but it has a free will and a direction. That doesn't feel random. And so I'm not saying I know the answer to that. Randomness is kind of this thing we grabbed on for a while, but it ended up when we think about with the world we're in, okay, there are 10 to the 600 universes, and we happen to end up in the right one. How does that feel?
echo chambers, but we're also generating precisely information, and we can do that precisely from randomness. We can access this stream of information that apparently is chaotic, and we can extract knowledge out of that. And what I can see is that AI can pretty much do the same
That
thing.
is a good point. Yeah. So you're saying you can pick the patterns you pick up.
Randomness, we can say so. Like kind of like a
Yeah,
chaotic
yeah. No,
pattern,
that's
and then learn out of there.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting open question. I really do, because I don't know, what you're saying is, yes, we can generate order, exactly what's going on in the brain in doing that. And I don't think we have a clue. I mean, we know it's not just simply correlation. I mean, it doesn't explain how language is acquired in children. And this goes way back. I mean, Chomsky and his wife, Carol Chomsky, really believed that language capability was an innate property of the brain. How did that develop?
Yeah, but anyway, in any case, when we attribute sentence to something, we are also speaking that thing is conscious, right? And
Yeah.
the thing is that how can you know that I'm conscious? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if we cannot even tell if the other is actually conscious because we can only experience our own consciousness, how can we tell if AI is conscious or not? It's kind of a decision, more than anything else.
Can I add to this? So there's a question I ask with my work that's kind of similar. I'm always asking, is there an intelligence here beyond our understanding? And can we use our tools, like AI, or when we get advanced enough with quantum computing, to help us identify that, or identify the next step? Is it truly random, or is there intelligence? And how do we differentiate between it's a pattern or it's intelligence?
I guess that precisely these texts that tests that are doing now OpenAI and other companies, and where they are testing their IQ, and they are seeing if they are capable of resolving problems that are completely novel, that they never had before. And we are actually seeing that they are capable, and that they right now today have an IQ of 100.
And then model-based generative, world model generative. And what the free energy principle and the whole school around active inference is about, it says, I want to know what is the causal model that generated this output. Not what was the correlation, but what is the model of the world? What is the model of experience that generated that output? I think when we do that, and that's the area that I work in now. So we literally, when we're watching people interact with each other, we're trying to infer, what do they believe? And the whole thing is based on a notion of we are a bundle of beliefs, and we kind of do science with our beliefs. We do hypotheses. I believe this is going to work this way. And then we have an experience. Whoops, that wasn't right, or it was right. And that creates free energy, uncertainty. And then we figure out, how do I act to reduce that uncertainty? Well, I can examine the evidence, or I can change my beliefs. That is the nature of a neuroscience-based model, and it seems to be something very close to the way computational biology works in cells. You can explain the mitochondria. It also seems to be the way the brain actually works using brain imaging experience. Keep in mind, people who developed this come out of the pioneers in brain imaging. Why I believe that's an important place to look, because it's really looking at how does the brain work? How does the connections work in the brain? And there's a lot more to the brain than just the simple, way we do an artificial neuron is just literally a matrix. Inputs create certain output. And so I think there's much, much more to actual causal modeling and how we generate world model stories, beliefs. This is where the art comes in. Is because you're generating out of something more than just simple correlation. There's something generative there. We may experience something. It's a little bit like like I said, with a parent and a child, when they have shared experiences and they put language to it, what is going on in the sharing is deeper, which is creating almost a generative sense of what might happen. And so I don't know that we know yet what all that is. I just know it's far more. There's something deeper. There's something worldviewish that goes on inside the human brain. But your point is that all of those concepts exist outside of space and time. When we speak, we're bringing them into space and time. if we happen to have a shared experience or life experience of where that may have us perceive things the same way, then when I say it, all of a sudden it's going to resonate with some people and other people not.
So, language is sort of like the observation collapses the field, right? Like when
Yes.
we bring it into language.
It's observation, right? Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But art doesn't quite do that. Art doesn't necessarily collapse the field the same way language does, or does it?
I guess it does.
Yeah. By the way,
Well, it depends. There's a lot of kinds of art out there.
there's also been recent publications in science that indicate quantum entanglement may be at the level of how we experience consciousness, which would imply that all of us are in some way overlapping fields of concepts, and whether we realize it or not. And I really believe that that is more than likely the case. That our notions, our ideas, how we talk, are really rooted in classical physics. Our language, the fact that we have dichotomy, doesn't make any sense in a quantum world because it's in between. And I think we live in a world where all things are possible and there's emergent patterns of shared experience. That's what the resonance is about. And I actually believe even sound systems, how we learn, I can walk you through a model of how groups develop the phonetics of their language, the phonemes of their language. Some languages have 14, some have 144. Okay, these are resonance modes of sounds that were attributed to meaning shared over some period of time, or how they shared experience. I frankly think you can explain everything in the universe with resonance, but I'll leave it alone.
How about,
So
we got a mic.
I have one comment to that, to kind of summarize this very quickly too, is that if entanglement is shown to bring about consciousness, let's just say we're not entangled with our technologies and our AI, in which case we're closer to our AI being conscious if we're entangled with our technologies, and that gets to your question.
First of all, I just want to thank you all, everyone, and Nicole for inviting me wherever you are. I'm a recovering tenured professor and a licensed clinical psychologist, so this conversation is just, my neurons are firing in so many different ways. I pivoted into technology, and I'm really fascinated by this conversation because as a cross-cultural psychologist, when we look at intelligence, there's so much that we've missed of what intelligence means because we really are not putting in the data into the machine that really represents everyone. And the data that we're pulling from is completely biased of who's actually entering that. And there's so many people that don't even have access to technology and computers and phones that we're not tapping into and getting the causal input to come to say if something is causation versus fact, right, of an end result. So I think, or answer that's right or wrong, right? So I'm fascinated by asking you about how do you see the cross-cultural aspect of the data that we're inputting, and Howard Gardner looked at intelligence in a very different way of, kinesthetics and music and art, and for you guys to bring those two worlds together is really beautiful. And I have a son that's into creative world, and before our generations, that was not something that many parents would really, promote, because now we can't make technology without the creatives, right? To be able to bring our vision to light. And now there's some idea that you can live and prosper as a creative and make a living. But now technology is going to take away from some of those things that makes us human, that can do things that are not really unique to us, right? That it'll open up space to be able to do the things that are uniquely us and individually imprinted by each person that has an imprint and a DNA that's separate, but so much overlap, right? So there's a lot of things that are, firing in my brain right now, but my ultimate question is, how do you make sure that the unconscious biases that we all have in a shared experience and a trauma that you may experience differently, that it was an African-American man, another person would say, no, it's a white, woman, or something, we know this in the research, that we have our biases and our shared experiences not always shared and based on our own personal biases. That's what I worry about and concerned about, and wondering how you see that data input really representing the full universe that we live in.
You've hit at the heart of why I do what I do. I mean, honestly, seriously, because I think for decades, AI has been about between an individual and a piece of technology. And humanity is about how we share things together. In other words, there is no such thing as intelligence that is not collective, right? There is, I mean, if you think about it, how do you know? And so, yeah, we built this model of AI that says that intelligence is something you get out of data. I think that so misses the idea, because and so with the whole AI that, my friends here know I work on, is this notion of how do we use AI to optimize understanding each other in common ground? Because it's through shared experience that we experience being human. And I just think it's what you just said is so, so important. Well, I gave a little talk, Harvard Faculty Club, and in the audience was the chairman of psychiatry at Harvard. And his name is David Silberswag. He's also the dean of medicine, and we became friends. This was like a couple of years ago. And we're now working on a center. We're looking for funding, if anybody has big checkbooks, to form a center on brain science, AI, and human pro-social behavior. How do we look at AI as a way of, and now in our, working in the company, we have a nonprofit around that. But I think this is just fundamental to our future, because we don't have intelligence alone. This is what we call schizophrenia. We call that mental illness, and I think a lot of our use of technology is driving us in that direction. 40% of the population, maybe globally, that's suffering a form of mental illness because of this dissociation introduced by technology. And that's about as radical as I'm going to get tonight, but I feel pretty strongly about it.
I wanted to.
Thanks for that.
Who was the person you mentioned?
I'm sorry?
Who was the person you mentioned?
David Silberswag, Silbersweig. He's also one of the pioneers of brain imaging. He worked with Karle Friston, who was at, so the reason I'm so fascinated by these, brain scientists, because I'm fascinated with how do we use AI to make us more human, not less.
So I wanted to
That was
bring
awesome.
up something as well
I'm not
for
allowed to
this
drop
with
the mic,
Tom.
right? I'm just-
And I took some notes from when he was talking upstairs, because he was just doing a huge genius brain dump while we're eating our snacks. That also I wanted to, one thing is the importance of data sovereignty, different countries putting in their own data, their own cultural information. That helps take a step in that direction. It's not complete by any means, but it does help. But Tom, a lot of Tom's work, all your work centers around the natural order being foundational models, structuring foundational models. And that really, I think, helps to give this structure that will be for benefit. And ideally, eliminate or work against some of these biases. If everything is structured, if the foundational models are structured in alignment with nature. And can you explain that a little bit more clearly and succinctly?
Well, I think you can start off with one component is what we said in that slide is, look, recognize that the reason deep learning works is really because the physics of magnetism and the underpinning models of that. So, and by the way, I started talking about that a long time ago, and people thought I was a little bit crazy about it, but now it's becoming more broadly recognized, particularly the Nobel Prizes. So yeah. The other, but that's one. That's just say recognize that, but there's so much more that can come out of looking at why. Look, there's a young group of scientists now looking at mycelium networks, how trees communicate. Is that can that influence a model of AI? That's brilliant, right? Because think about it. I mean, trees know how to tell each other that, hey, there's a giraffe eating you. This guy over here, look, the rest of you guys ought to, put some chemicals into your leaves that they don't taste so good. I mean, it's true. I mean, it is nature.
And it's interspecies.
Yes. And so nature has levels of intelligence we're not recognizing. And we just went to engineering and put the pedal to the metal and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. But my point is that nature will tell us more if we listen. And then it goes to how the brain operates. We used to think for a long, long time that depression was chemical. And the pharmaceutical companies, I hope I was here from them, but they're still persuading everyone that's true. That's not true. There's something called transcranial stimulation, where you can cure depression like that. It's purely topological. It makes a lot of sense, too, when you think about just neural connections. And so there's all kinds of things like this that we have to look to nature of how are things working. I guess the one thing that comes out of this totally is humility. I don't know how else to say it, but I love what Feynman said. You know I like Feynman, right? But he just said we shouldn't be so impressed that we figured these things out. We should be so deeply in awe that nature allows us to see it. And that's an attitude I think we've lost. We've gotten too proud about what we accomplished, and we're only a little bit of the way there.
I think we have a question here, and then maybe we'll start to wrap up, and we can just, we'll continue the conversation.
Oh boy, last question. That's pressure.
Big pressure, yeah.
Two questions, actually. The first, because I just want to get this right. You said all the ontologies will become synchronized. Am I getting that quote right? Because you're not going to synchronize the ontologies if I don't get the quote right. Like, counterintuitive.
No, I think that's a theoretical. It would say if everyone is in communication. So what was being said here before is the way we mix the cultural. I wanted to comment on the thing about where does culture come in and experience. That comes through exchange, right? I see the world as you perceive it. You see the world as I perceive it. It has to do with our upbringing. This is why communication between us is so vital. Now, if we are in communication, if we keep that up ad infinitum, we're going to start to learn more and more about each other. It'll never be perfect, but it'll trend towards a level of deeper understanding. And, those of us who've been in long-term relationships, I've been married 32 years now, and so that, going well, and it has, gets deeper and deeper about understanding how the other person thinks. It can be dangerous, too, because you already think, I know what you're going to say. That's bad.
You've learned.
But my actual question was, you talk about, you think correlation is just the start, if even that, and causation is really where that degree of intelligence is, and I think that resonates with me. Like, that makes sense. What I'm wondering is, I could easily, and maybe it's because it already exists, so it's easy to imagine it, why correlation exists within the technology, because it's ones and zeros at a certain level, and you can extract from there. My question is there even technology to start harnessing the causation?
Yes,
effect?
Absolutely.
And there is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's and it actually goes back to a Presbyterian minister in the 18th century, a guy called Bayes, or we all call it Bayesian, but the fact is, he developed his first notion of how we determine the causality is we have a hypothesis and we do an experiment. If it confirms it, thank you. That is beginning, that's training us. Okay, we start to do the correlation between a cause we expect to see and how the experiment works. And you keep building that network of what I expected, and you start to assemble all that into a world model, a model of how things operate. And that's a clustering. I mean, you can say, well, aren't those correlations? No, they're clustering into a bigger model. And there's a lot of tech. In fact, even in the large language model world now, there are causal models being used to do generative. So it's moving in that direction. And it will get there because it has to. But it will. I just think it's going to take time.
Thanks, everybody, for being with us tonight. What a pleasure. Wow. Thanks,